Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but on one clear August night in northern Massachusetts, where the Atlantic breeze carries a hint of salt and the skies are so pristine that even the faintest stars pierce the darkness, I experienced something that still fills me with wonder and a quiet, profound love for the mystery of the universe. It was one of those evenings when the pollution is so low, so negligible, that you can see the heavens with your bare eyes. I had been out for a long walk with my old dog, bless his soul, trudging along the familiar coastal trail that winds through the woods near my home. My dog, loyal and gentle, trotted at my side as I let my mind wander, thinking about everything and nothing all at once. The night was warm, yet there was a crispness in the air that promised the coming fall, and the Atlantic's rhythmic murmur provided a constant, soothing backdrop. I decided to take a brief break, leaning against an ancient oak tree by the path, and pulled out a cigarette. As I struck the match and inhaled the first drag, I let my eyes wander upward. By a stroke of lucky timing, as the ember glowed in my hand, I caught sight of something unusual in the sky. Two tiny, faint objects, barely noticeable at first, appeared where I'd expect to see nothing but the familiar, linear march of satellites or space junk. Typically, I've seen countless satellites crossing the night sky, each one moving in a predictable straight line. But these two objects were different. They weren't following any linear path. Instead, they moved in a slow, intricate dance, weaving away from each other and then drawing close again, as if in some sort of silent conversation. For a few heartbeats, they halted in mid-air, hovering as if suspended by an unseen force, before resuming their graceful, unpredictable motion. I stood there, cigarette forgotten in my hand, entranced by the spectacle unfolding above me. My heart, normally steady and calm during these solitary walks, began to race, not with fear, but with an inexplicable joy. There was something enchanting about the way these lights moved. They were delicate, almost ethereal, like fireflies dancing in slow motion against the vast canvas of space. The sight stirred in me a feeling of connection, a sense that even in our individual struggles and joys, we are all part of a larger, mysterious tapestry. As I watched, the objects continued their weaving pattern, their subtle movements so mesmerizing that I felt like I was witnessing a secret performance meant only for me. I wondered if they were merely atmospheric phenomena, perhaps plasma balls or some rare natural event, but the precision of their motion, the deliberate pauses and the graceful interplay between separation and convergence hinted at something more. I couldn't quite explain it, and perhaps I never will. After what seemed like an eternity, yet was only a matter of minutes, my attention was reluctantly drawn back to my surroundings. I must have taken a couple more drags of that long-forgotten cigarette before I realized the objects had slowly faded out of view. I stood there for a moment, eyes lingering on the empty expanse of the sky, feeling as though I'd been given a glimpse into a secret not meant for everyone. The rest of the walk passed in a daze. I returned home with a heart lighter than it had been in weeks, filled with a sense of profound connection and a quiet hope that there were wonders in the universe that we still had yet to understand. I didn't mention the sight to many people, partly because I wasn't sure what to make of it myself, and partly because I feared that others might think I was overreacting, or even crazy. After all, in a world that demands logical explanations, how could something so delicate and inexplicable be real? I've since learned that some in my extended family have whispered about similar occurrences at our old fishing spot, a place steeped in mystery and family lore. Stories passed down over nearly 100 years speak of strange lights and other phenomena, suggesting that our land has always harbored secrets, quietly revealed on clear nights like that one. The idea that my experience might be part of a long legacy of unexplained events brings both comfort and a lingering chill, as if I'm now linked to a tradition of wonder and fear that spans generations. In the days that followed, I found myself revisiting that moment in my mind, replaying the scene over and over as if trying to capture every nuance. The slight shimmer of the objects, the way they moved against the backdrop of a perfectly clear sky, and the feeling of being part of something vast and unknown. I even started keeping a journal, scribbling down every detail, no matter how trivial it seemed. I recorded the time, the place, the cool brush of the evening air, and the gentle hum of the world around me. I wrote about the sensation of connection, the idea that somewhere out there, beyond the noise and chaos of our everyday lives, there exists a quiet, deliberate beauty. I've grown older since that night, and the memory has become both a comfort and a reminder of the mysterious tapestry of existence. Whenever I find myself in the stillness of a clear night, whether I'm walking by the coast or sitting in the quiet of my room, I look up at the sky and feel that same sense of awe and gentle wonder. It's as if the universe is speaking in a language of light and shadow, sharing its secrets with those who are willing to pause, to listen, and to truly see. There are nights when I even think I catch a glimpse of movement, a subtle shift in the starlight, or a fleeting glimmer that dances at the edge of my vision, but I never see those precise objects again. Perhaps they were a one-time marvel, a fleeting performance in a long, quiet history of the skies above northern Massachusetts. Perhaps they were nothing more than plasma balls or some rare meteorological phenomenon. Or maybe, just maybe, they were something more. Something that reminded me that the universe is filled with mysteries that defy simple explanation. I tell this story sparingly. Most people dismiss it as the ramblings of someone who's seen too many late nights under the stars, or they brush it off as a childish fancy. But to me, it's a truth that resonates deeply. A reminder that, even in the most ordinary of places, there are wonders that can transform a simple walk into an encounter with the extraordinary. And so, every time I step outside on a clear August night, I do so with a sense of reverence, a quiet expectation that the universe might reveal itself once again, even if only for a moment. I keep the memory of that night close to my heart, a secret shared between me and the endless, starlit sky. In that silent communion, I find solace, and in that delicate dance of light and shadow, I see a glimpse of the vast, unfathomable beauty that lies beyond our everyday lives. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more jaw-dropping tales, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 2. While driving back home to Los Angeles with a friend, I experienced something that still haunts my mind. We had just spent a few days visiting family near Phoenix, Arizona, and were heading west on Highway 58 just outside Boron, California, en route to Mojave to catch the 14. The night was clear and warm, and we were jamming out to our favorite tunes. Loud music filling the cramped interior of our aging sedan. I remember the steady hum of the engine, the rhythmic thump of the bass in the speakers, and the way the neon glow of passing billboards flickered against the desert landscape. It was one of those nights when everything seemed normal, and the road stretched out like an endless ribbon beneath the star-pocked sky. We were deep into our drive when, after what felt like an ordinary stretch of highway, I suddenly became aware of a disorienting absence of motion. My head felt heavy, my vision blurred, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up. The world around me had shifted. I found myself pulled over on the side of the road, my car idling quietly under the vast, indifferent night sky. A quick glance at the clock told me that approximately 3 hours had passed, although it all felt like a single, surreal moment. My friend, who had been sitting in the back seat, was fast asleep, his head lolling against the seat as if the weight of exhaustion had finally claimed him. I shook him awake, my voice trembling as I tried to piece together what had happened. "Hey, wake up, man," I said, my throat tight with confusion and fear. His eyes fluttered open slowly, and the disoriented look on his face told me he too was struggling to grasp the transition from a night of loud music and endless highways to this eerie, silent moment on the roadside. For several minutes, we sat in a state of collective shock. My heart pounded in my ears as I tried to recall every detail leading up to that moment. One minute, we were cruising along, windows down, laughing and singing along to our favorite tracks. The next, everything had slowed to a crawl. And then, nothing. It was as if we had been dragged into a void where time and space lost all meaning. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers cold and shaking, and checked my phone. 5% battery, as usual. But it was enough to see the time. It was well past the time we should have been awake. The realization that we had somehow lost 3 hours filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. The desert around us was silent. No sound of passing cars, no distant hum of city life, just an oppressive quiet that pressed against my eardrums. I glanced out the windshield at the empty highway, wondering if anyone had seen us. The road was deserted, a lonely stretch of asphalt lit only by the intermittent glow of distant streetlights and the faint light of the rising moon. My friend sat there, eyes wide and unfocused, as if he were in a daze, and I wondered if he too felt the same disorientation and creeping unease. I tried to remember what had happened during those missing hours. Had we taken a wrong turn, or had we simply drifted into a state of inattention? I recalled the music still playing in the background, the voices of my friend and me blending with the rhythmic hum of the engine. And then, a strange thought occurred to me. What if something beyond our understanding had taken hold of our journey? My mind raced with wild possibilities. Maybe it was a simple lapse of time, or perhaps something more sinister had intervened. The more I thought about it, the more I recalled subtle hints leading up to that moment. A flicker of static on the radio, a brief, unexplained jolt in the steering wheel, and then that overwhelming sensation of being untethered from the passage of time. I remembered a fleeting glimpse of the desert stretching out in a distorted haze, as if the very fabric of reality had been warped around us. My stomach churned with dread as I tried to piece together the sequence of events, but the details were maddeningly elusive, like fragments of a half-remembered dream. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity in that strange limbo, I managed to rouse my friend enough to start the car. We drove back toward civilization in a heavy, wordless silence, the weight of that inexplicable lapse pressing down on us. The highway, once familiar and inviting, now seemed to stretch on endlessly, its curves and straight stretches imbued with a quiet menace. Every so often, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, pale, anxious eyes staring back at me, the kind that spoke of a mind grappling with an experience that defied explanation. We eventually pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of a small town, the neon sign buzzing softly as we refueled in silence. I stepped out for a moment to stretch and take a breath of the cool desert air. The station was nearly deserted, its flickering lights casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. I stared up at the sky, searching for any sign that might help explain the hours we'd lost. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of night, cold and indifferent. I returned to the car, and my friend, still silent and lost in thought, mumbled something about it having been like a bad dream. I couldn't tell if his tone was dismissive or if he, too, was haunted by what had transpired. We drove the rest of the way home with little conversation, each of us engulfed by our own swirling thoughts. Once home, I locked the door behind me, the routine action offering a fleeting sense of safety. I sat alone in the dark living room for a long while, the ticking of the clock on the wall the only sound. But even in that supposed sanctuary, my mind raced with the possibilities of what had happened. Over the following days, I tried to rationalize the experience. I researched sleep disorders, time slips, even the more outlandish theories of UFO abductions and alien interventions. Yet every explanation seemed too mundane or too fantastical to fully account for the 3 hours we'd lost. I kept replaying the events in my mind, the familiar music fading into an eerie silence, the desert road stretching out in distorted hues, the sudden pull of time that seemed to drag us into a different dimension. At work, I found it hard to concentrate. I would catch myself staring blankly at my computer screen, my thoughts drifting back to that desolate highway and the inexplicable lapse of time. Colleagues asked if I was all right, and I would offer a half-hearted smile, pretending that it was just a rough night. But inside, I was haunted by the memory, burdened by the nagging question, what happened to us out there? I tried talking to my friend about it, but every time we mentioned that night, he only shrugged and said, "It was weird, man. I can't explain it, but I know it wasn't just us falling asleep." That response only deepened my own uncertainty. Was it possible that something had truly intervened? Something so subtle and inexplicable that it erased hours from our memory? Or was it simply the product of exhaustion and the endless monotonous stretches of the desert? I have since learned that I'm not the only one who's experienced such anomalies. Some online forums and classified reports hint at similar events, instances where time seems to slip away, where the ordinary laws of physics momentarily falter under the weight of the unknown. The more I read, the more I began to suspect that our experience might be part of a larger, inexplicable phenomenon that defies the rational explanations of our daily lives. Yet, for all the theories and speculations, I have no definitive answers. Now, whenever I drive down a long, empty highway at night, I can't help but feel a twinge of anxiety, a reminder of that surreal, terrifying lapse. I still remember the way the road seemed to vanish into a blur, the way the steady beat of my favorite song was replaced by an eerie silence, and the way my heart raced as I realized we'd lost hours in an instant. It's as if a part of me is forever tethered to that mysterious night, a silent witness to something that remains just out of reach, forever shrouded in the darkness of the unknown. I don't speak much about it now. Most people dismiss it as a simple case of sleep or a momentary lapse in attention, but I know what I experienced was real. A moment when the fabric of time seemed to unravel before my very eyes, leaving me with a deep, unyielding sense of mystery and a nagging fear that the universe is far more enigmatic than we dare to believe. And sometimes, when the night is especially still and the desert stretches out in endless isolation, I find myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that same inexplicable void staring back at me, a silent echo of that fateful night on Highway 58. Redditor 3. As a child, I experienced something that shattered my understanding of safety and solitude. I remember those nights vividly, lying awake in my bed, heart pounding, eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to step out of the shadows. I was always hypervigilant, scanning the bedroom door, the closet, every window, and even the walls, convinced that something was watching me. I don't know why I was so terrified of being alone in that way. Maybe it was the stories whispered in the dark, or perhaps an intuition I couldn't explain. But one truth remains: I was abducted. The memories are fragmented yet vivid. I recall the sensation of being grabbed by the wrist, small, firm hands that belonged to little gray beings. They were about as tall as a toddler, roughly 3 feet high. Their heads were enormous and bulbous, and their eyes, large and insect-like, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I remember how they would run their long, spindly fingers along each of my vertebrae, as if counting them, as they led me out of my bedroom. In my young, frightened mind, the idea of someone entering my room through the walls, invisible and relentless, was a terror beyond measure. I was terrified of needles too, even as a child. The mere thought of a nurse touching my arm with a needle, digging into my bone, would make my heart race uncontrollably. And those little grays, they reminded me of that worst fear. Their skin was a pale, unwrinkled gray, resembling some sort of cold, lifeless putty. They lacked any visible musculature, as if they were constructed from a substance that defied the natural textures of flesh. They moved with a disconcerting, robotic precision, yet they were unmistakably organic. I knew, even then, that their eyes weren't mere props or the result of a spacesuit. Those eyes, wide and unblinking, were real, and they seemed to see right through me. There are other memories too, ones that haunt me even now. After the little ones had finished their unsettling examination, I was taken to meet a larger being. I recall being led into a room that was strangely plain, lacking any semblance of what I would expect from a spacecraft. There, standing before me, was a big gray alien, perhaps 6 feet tall. Unlike the small ones, she exuded a presence, a kind of eerie intelligence. Her skin, still a muted gray, had more defined features. I remember her large eyes, which seemed to hold an uncanny depth. When she looked into my eyes, I felt as if she could read my every thought. I sensed her presence in my head, a persistent murmur that tried to communicate directly with me. In a voice that wasn't quite heard through sound but felt within my mind, she told me things that I can barely recall with clarity now. One message in particular stands out: don't make too much trash, or people will get sick. Stop cutting down so many trees. She added, "We're very grateful for your help. You're a big help to us in our project. Don't tell other people about us. They can't see us and will only get upset." I didn't care what she said. All I wanted was to go home. I was a child, terrified, longing for the simple comfort of my own bed, my own familiar world, and I couldn't understand why someone I trusted would subject me to this otherworldly ordeal. The experience was not like a nightmare of sleep paralysis, where your body is immobilized by fear and your mind conjures up shadowy figures. This was real. I wasn't just paralyzed in a half-dream state. I was being led, examined, and communicated with by beings that invaded the sanctum of my mind. The encounter left me with a deep-seated terror that I carried for days. I would wake up feeling like I had been robbed of my own thoughts, my own sense of self. Every morning, as the remnants of the experience faded, a lingering anxiety would remain. I would lie awake, acutely aware of every creak in the house, every whisper of the wind outside my window. I began to dread closing my eyes, for fear that the beings might return. Doors, windows, even the walls. Each seemed a potential portal for them to reappear. In the years that followed, I tried to rationalize the incident. I read everything I could about alien abductions, about the so-called gray aliens that populate countless abduction stories and conspiracy theories. I watched documentaries and read books like Communion and even some more scholarly texts that attempted to explain these experiences as either psychological phenomena or misinterpretations of sleep paralysis. But nothing ever fit quite right. The more realistic depictions, the ones where the Greys looked truly alien with their oversized heads, insect-like eyes, and eerily smooth skin, resonated with me far more than the sanitized versions that showed them with subtle human traits like cheekbones or faint wrinkles. To me, the most authentic images were those that depicted them as pure, raw beings, stripped of any pretense of humanity. I even noticed that when I saw depictions with more realistic insectoid eyes that wrapped around the sides rather than facing forward, they struck me as profoundly alien. Some cats I've seen over the years have eyes that remind me of that same unsettling quality, but nothing quite compares. I kept these memories locked away, shared only in whispers with those few who might understand, lest people label me as delusional or unstable. Yet, I have revisited the memory countless times. Late at night, when the world is silent and the only sound is my own shallow breathing, I can almost feel those tiny hands running along my spine, as if counting my vertebrae. I still remember the texture of the putty-like skin of the little Greys, the cold, unfeeling touch of their long fingers, the vivid image of that larger alien, the one with the piercing eyes that seemed to read my soul, remains even more haunting. Her presence was so overwhelming that, in my child's mind, it felt as though she had invaded not just my room, but the very core of my being. Over time, I learned to live with the memory, though it never fully left me. I avoided needles like the plague, haunted by the fear that the small Greys would return if I ever heard the click of a nurse's syringe. I became cautious of any sudden noises or shadows moving in the corners of my vision, and I started to question every little sound in the night. A creak, a whisper, a distant thud, as if it might be a sign that they were near. I even began to look out my window at night, half expecting to see those same large insectoid eyes staring back at me from the darkness. Now, as an adult, I still have moments where I wonder if those alien abduction experiences were truly unique, or if they were just manifestations of a deeply troubled mind. I sometimes question whether it was all a vivid, terrifying dream induced by sleep paralysis. But I know the difference. A dream fades, leaving behind a faint sense of unreality. What I experienced was as clear as day, the tactile memory of their touch, the distinct sound of their silent communication in my head, the sheer terror that gripped me so completely that I couldn't move. I have no hybrid experiences, no peaceful encounters, only the lingering horror of intrusion into my most private thoughts. There are nights when, as I lie in bed in the darkness, I feel that same oppressive presence, that ancient, inexplicable fear that perhaps my mind is not entirely my own. And I wonder if, somewhere in the vast unknowable reaches of the universe, those beings continue their silent work, gathering information, counting vertebrae, or perhaps, in some cryptic way, guiding our destinies without our consent. It's a thought that fills me with a bitter, unyielding dread. I don't speak of these experiences much now. Most people dismiss them as the fanciful nightmares of a disturbed child. But I know what I felt and what I saw. It's a secret embedded in my very being, a truth that haunts me in the quiet moments of the night, when the silence is heavy and the past comes crashing back like a tidal wave of forgotten terror. And though I've tried to rationalize it away with the sterile logic of science and psychology, there remains a part of me that is forever changed, forever vigilant, forever afraid of the unknown that may be lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. Redditor 4. When I was 16, during a camping trip in the rugged mountains near Springville, Utah, I witnessed something that still leaves me breathless with awe and dread. We were just a group of 4 of us, all in our teens, bunking in a cramped tent that hung low and heavy with thick canvas. The night was overcast, so thick that not a single star could pierce the dark veil above. We'd set up camp in a remote valley, far from any semblance of civilization, and the silence of the mountains was profound, broken only by our occasional laughter and whispered conversations. About an hour after we'd settled in, as I was trying to stifle a yawn and get comfortable on a sleeping bag that smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, something caught my eye. Through the dull, unyielding canvas of our tent, a light appeared, a strange, otherworldly glow that didn't belong in the murky night. My heart leapt in my chest as I nudged my friends awake, their groggy faces twisting with confusion as they tried to make sense of what we were seeing. We all gathered by the tent's entrance, craning our necks upward, our eyes wide with a mixture of terror and curiosity. The light was bizarre, an odd, almost pulsating beacon that shone with a sickly, eerie hue. It wasn't bright enough to be a searchlight, yet it was far too defined to be just a trick of our exhausted eyes. We stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as the light hung motionless in the sky, defying the oppressive cloud cover that had swallowed the stars whole. After about 30 minutes of silent, uneasy watching, a slow transformation began. The light, which had been fixed in place, started to move. At first it inched downwards, its glow intensifying as it descended toward the mountain valley below. I remember feeling a surge of adrenaline and a familiar, creeping panic, like the sensation before a storm, where the calm before the chaos sends shivers down your spine. We exchanged nervous glances, and one of us muttered something incoherent about that thing lighting up the valley like a spotlight. It was as if the object were casting an unnatural glow that bathed the rugged slopes and dark pines in a ghostly light. In our raw teenage panic, we did the only thing we knew. We started swearing at it, our voices rising into the night. One of my friends even fumbled with his BB gun, a ridiculous attempt at defense, and fired a few shots into the darkness. The pellets clattered on the rocky ground, but the mysterious light continued its descent, unmoved by our futile protests. The sound of the BB gunshots was absurdly out of place, like a child's game against the vast, indifferent power of the natural world. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the light stopped. It hung suspended in the sky for another 30 minutes or so, its glow soft yet persistent, like a beacon of some unspoken message. We remained there, shivering in the cold mountain air, our breaths coming in quick, ragged gasps as we watched, transfixed. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch on into eternity, the light split, dividing into 2 distinct objects. One of them flared with a sudden blue flame and shot off into the sky in one direction, while the other did the same, darting off in the opposite direction, as if following an invisible command. I remember standing there, feeling both vindicated and utterly terrified. At that moment, our casual camping trip had transformed into something beyond our wildest nightmares. A living, breathing enigma in the heavens that defied all our understanding. We didn't know what to call it. We were too scared to speak, too overwhelmed to process the sight of these bifurcated lights vanishing into the endless, silent dark. In the days that followed, back in the valley near our old family cabin, whispers of similar phenomena began to circulate among locals. People claimed that for decades, unusual lights had been seen in these very mountains, an ongoing mystery that had woven itself into the fabric of our community. My friends and I, however, rarely spoke of that night again. We were too frightened, too unsettled by what we'd witnessed, and over time the memory settled into a quiet corner of our minds, an experience we all agreed to never discuss. Even now, years later, whenever I drive along the mountain roads on clear nights, I sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of a similar glow. It's never as dramatic, never as orchestrated, but it's enough to send a shiver down my spine. I sometimes wonder if what I saw was a natural phenomenon, perhaps a rare plasma ball or a peculiar optical effect caused by the unique geology of the region. Yet, deep down, I know there was something more deliberate, something almost intelligent in the way those lights moved, split, and disappeared. I'm not one to talk about these things openly. Most people dismiss such experiences as the overactive imagination of a scared teenager. But I carry the memory like a scar, a permanent reminder that the world is filled with mysteries that defy our tidy explanations. Sometimes, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I replay that night over and over. The thick canvas of our tent, the ghostly light hovering above, the sudden descent that lit up the valley, and the split into two flaming blue orbs that vanished into the darkness. And in those moments, I feel both a deep, inexplicable connection to something vast and unknowable, and a lingering fear that perhaps we are never truly alone. I often think about that night as a turning point, a moment when the ordinary world I thought I knew was cracked open by the extraordinary. It's a memory that, while painful and terrifying, has also filled me with a strange sense of wonder. There is a beauty in the unknown, a kind of haunting allure in the fact that the universe holds secrets beyond our comprehension. I still keep the spot in my mind, the dark, silent mountain valley where the light once descended, the clearing where the two blue flames soared away like signals sent into the void. And I sometimes wonder if, on a clear night, the universe might once again reveal itself in that same mysterious dance of light. Until then, I remain forever changed by that night. A secret, personal encounter with the unknown, etched in my heart and mind, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there are sparks of wonder waiting to be seen. Redditor 5. I grew up hearing strange stories from my family, tales that blurred the line between myth and reality. Back in the late 70s, my mother's sister was married to a man named Herbert Schirmer, a highway patrolman with a reputation for being as steady as a rock. Yet, despite his no-nonsense career on the roads, Herbert claimed to have experienced something so extraordinary that it haunted him for years afterward. He said that one fateful night, while on patrol in his patrol car, he encountered something that defied every rational explanation. I remember the hushed whispers in our family gatherings when his name was mentioned, though he never spoke of it publicly. According to my aunt, Herbert had been patrolling on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of the night. The road was dark and empty, lit only by the intermittent glow of his dashboard and the occasional flicker of passing headlights in the distance. He was doing his duty, driving slowly through the desolate landscape of a rural highway, when something caught his attention. Herbert recounted that he first noticed an unusual array of lights in the sky. They weren't the steady beams of a passing aircraft or the predictable glimmer of a star. These were erratic, almost pulsating lights that danced across the heavens in a manner that defied the laws of physics. As he drove, the lights seemed to swirl and shimmer, as if beckoning him to pay closer attention. Then, in a moment of eerie clarity, the lights coalesced into a shape. A massive, unidentifiable object that hovered silently above the road. Herbert said that for a brief moment he could almost see the contours of the craft, but all he could really discern were the brilliant, shifting lights that seemed to breathe life into the night. He continued, his voice low and measured, even as he described the impossible. According to Herbert, the object wasn't just a passive observer of the world below. It had an undeniable presence, an intensity that made the air around it vibrate with an almost palpable energy. Then, suddenly, as if triggered by his very presence, everything went dark. Herbert lost all awareness of time. 2-3 hours passed in a black void of nothingness. When he came to, his patrol car was still parked on the roadside, and the familiar hum of the engine had resumed, but the world outside was unchanged, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred at all. It was only later, under hypnosis, that Herbert began to recall the details of what had happened during those lost hours. He described a sensation of being pulled from his car, of floating weightlessly through an endless corridor of light and shadow. In that altered state, he remembered being surrounded by figures, small, indistinct shapes that seemed to watch him with inhuman curiosity. He recalled the feeling of cold, damp air against his skin, a sensation so vivid it made his heart race just talking about it. The recollections came in fragments, a flash of brilliant light, a burst of inexplicable energy, and the overwhelming sense that he had been taken aboard some kind of vessel, only to be returned with no explanation. I've spent countless hours poring over old family photographs and listening to my aunt's hushed recounting of Herbert's experience. There's even a video on YouTube where he reluctantly appears in an interview, his eyes haunted and his voice tinged with regret, recounting that night. Though he's long since been divorced and rarely speaks of the incident, the story has become a sort of family legend, a bizarre chapter in our collective history that we both dismiss with skepticism and secretly wonder about in quiet moments. Even though I've always been a rational person, I can't help but feel that there's something unsettlingly real in Herbert's account. I mean, how many highway patrolmen can claim to have had an encounter that lasted for hours, a period during which time itself seemed to dissolve into darkness? I remember his description of the lights. They weren't merely flickering, they pulsed in an almost hypnotic rhythm, a luminous dance that defied the typical, linear motion of satellites or airplanes. He said the object emitted a series of rapid bursts, and its colors shifted, sometimes a cold, eerie blue, sometimes a fiery red, that seemed to ripple across its surface like water under a moonlit sky. I can't help but compare his recollections to the accounts in those alien abduction books I read as a kid. The classic image of the little gray aliens, with their oversized heads and dark, unblinking eyes, never bothered me as much as the thought of something so advanced and alien as to disrupt the very flow of time. Herbert's experience wasn't about small figures in a sterile metallic ship. It was about an entire phenomenon, a moment in time when the normal rules of our world ceased to apply. It was as if the universe had reached down and brushed his life with its unfathomable mystery, leaving him forever changed. I've often wondered if Herbert's experience was a genuine encounter with an intelligence far beyond our own, or if it was a vivid, albeit disturbing, hallucination born of extreme stress and the isolation of long, lonely nights on patrol. The truth, I suspect, lies somewhere in between. There are those who believe that the human mind, when pushed to its limits, can create elaborate scenarios that feel utterly real. Yet the meticulous details in Herbert's recollection, the way he described the sensation of weightlessness, the fragmentary images of figures that watched him, and the overwhelming feeling of being taken somewhere, lend a weight to his story that can't easily be dismissed as mere fantasy. I recall one particularly haunting detail. Under hypnosis, Herbert mentioned hearing a low, melodic hum, a sound that seemed to come from deep within his very being. It was like the universe itself was speaking in a language that defied words, a sound that resonated with both beauty and dread. He described the hum as a constant background score to his abduction, a symphony of the unknown that underscored every moment of his lost time. That detail, more than any other, has stuck with me over the years. It suggests that what he experienced wasn't simply a random glitch of time or a momentary lapse in consciousness, but something orchestrated by forces that remain hidden from our understanding. I've tried to talk to others about Herbert's story, some of my colleagues at work, friends who share an interest in the paranormal, but most dismiss it with a skeptical laugh or a wave of the hand. They say it's just one of those tall tales, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night drives on desolate highways. And yet, when I close my eyes, I can see the memory of that night, the stark, cold light of an alien phenomenon breaking the monotony of a routine patrol, the way time itself seemed to unravel, and the lingering, unexplainable sense of something watching from beyond. I'm left with a profound sense of mystery, a nagging question that I've carried with me ever since. Who or what was Herbert Schirmer? Was he a mere man caught in the throes of a profound, unexplainable event, or was he chosen by the universe to witness a fragment of a reality far beyond our mundane understanding? I have no definitive answers, only the lingering echoes of a night that continues to haunt my dreams and my waking thoughts. Now, as I sit quietly in my office, I can still feel the chill of that long-ago night creeping up on me whenever I glance at the clock. The memory of Herbert's story, with all its raw, unfiltered detail, reminds me that the universe is vast and full of secrets, some of which may never be revealed to us. And every time I hear a soft hum in the dead of night, or catch a flicker of light that dances on the edge of my vision, I can't help but wonder if there's a piece of that mystery still lingering in the world, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for the truth to break through the darkness. Redditor 6. I'll never forget that freezing winter night. I was home alone on a deserted dirt road in the middle of nowhere, the kind of night where the chill in the air seems to freeze your very thoughts. I'd been watching the world through my living room window when something extraordinary caught my eye. A light show unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't the ordinary glow of streetlights or the muted shimmer of distant stars. No, these were red, white, and blue LED lights, bright and pulsating like the ones you'd see at a kid's arcade, but magnified and alive, lighting up my entire house. Curiosity battled with fear inside me as I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The cold bit at my cheeks, and every step on the dusty path sent tiny clouds of fine grit swirling around my boots. My breath came out in quick, foggy puffs as I hurried to the front yard, eyes fixed on the sky. There, in the midst of the inky darkness, was a huge, saucer-shaped craft. It spun so rapidly that it seemed to blur at the edges, its motion almost liquid, like metal being melted yet somehow maintaining a perfect, intact saucer-like shape. The object was moving erratically, yet with an unsettling precision that defied any natural explanation. As I watched, I realized with a start that something was very, very wrong. It wasn't just the brightness that was mesmerizing, it was the way it made me feel numb. I could see clearly, but I couldn't hear a thing. Not the whistling wind, not the creak of the old house. Nothing. It was as if the craft's presence had sucked all sound and sensation from the night, leaving me with nothing but its blinding light. I stood there, heart pounding like a drum, trying to comprehend the impossible. Then, as if the universe itself decided to upend my reality, a white flash erupted from the craft. I remember the searing brilliance, a burst of pure light that overwhelmed my vision. In that moment, I felt myself lifted, no, transported, away from my familiar yard. When my vision returned, I found myself somewhere utterly alien. I was in a large, echoing room that I later learned was part of a high school ramada. The room was sterile and cold under a huge metal roof, and dozens of tables were arranged in neat rows. I was sprawled across one of those tables, my bare chest exposed to the chill, and I could barely breathe. It wasn't like a typical abduction scenario with a high-tech ship. Nothing resembled a ship at all. It was just a plain room, stripped of any decoration, a kind of holding area that seemed to exist outside of time. I tried to move, to cry out, but my senses were numbed. I couldn't hear the echoes of my own voice, couldn't feel the rough surface of the table beneath me, and even the smell of the room was absent, replaced by an eerie, sterile nothingness. All I had was my vision, a persistent, horrifying clarity of every detail. And then, from the far side of that room, I saw them. I remember the first glimpse of the little gray aliens as if it were etched in my mind. They were small, maybe 3 feet tall. Classic grays with oversized bulbous heads and large insect-like eyes. Their skin was a flat, featureless gray, smooth and cold, like some kind of construction putty. They moved in a strangely mechanical manner, their long fingers reaching out to gently grasp my wrist, as if they were counting the vertebrae along my spine. I felt every touch as a sharp, invasive chill that seeped deep into my bones. My terror peaked when I was suddenly surrounded by these beings. They formed a semicircle around me, their dark, unblinking eyes locked onto mine. I remember the way they stared, as if searching my very soul with those diagonal, insectoid slits. Their uniforms were oddly colored, each one a different shade, crafted from a material so reflective it was almost metallic. I could sense that each alien had its own presence, its own agenda, yet none of them spoke. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. I was paralyzed with fear, trapped in a waking nightmare where I was utterly at their mercy. I don't recall how long it lasted, but eventually the aliens withdrew. One by one, they retreated into the shadows of the room until I was left alone once more. I closed my eyes, and in a blur of disjointed memories, I found myself standing back outside, in exactly the same spot where I had first seen that dazzling red, white, and blue light. I was trembling, my mind reeling from the inexplicable journey. I began to cry, sobs of pure, unadulterated terror. And then I fell into a restless sleep, too drained to even recall the details clearly. I never told a soul about that night, not until now. I've carried the weight of that memory alone, haunted by the sensation that someone had invaded my most private thoughts, counting my spine and etching their presence into my very being. And then, after I finally mustered the courage to read through some old online posts, I discovered something even more unnerving. I began to notice a small, persistent lump on my left earlobe, right where people usually get a piercing. I've thought about digging it out to see if it's a little piece of metal left behind by those creatures. A silent, inexplicable souvenir of my abduction. I've since learned that my experience isn't entirely isolated. Other accounts of similar encounters exist, some dismissed as sleep paralysis, others taken as proof of extraterrestrial interference. But to me, what happened was different. Raw, visceral, and terrifying in a way that no rational explanation can ever capture. It wasn't like a bad dream that fades with the morning light. It was a reality that I lived, felt, and remembered with every beat of my heart. Even now, I avoid dark, quiet places for a while after such experiences. I find it hard to close my eyes, afraid that the grays might return, that I'll once again be left with nothing but the empty, sterile silence of that alien chamber. I've learned to live with that fear, to keep it locked away, even as it colors every shadow and sound in my life. I don't speak of it openly, and most people dismiss my memories as the product of an overactive, traumatized mind. But I know what I experienced, and sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, I'm transported back to that dark, haunting room where the aliens watched me with those unblinking eyes. I'm not proud of what happened, nor do I wish it on anyone. It's a part of my past that I can neither forget nor fully explain, a mystery that haunts the quiet moments between waking and sleeping, a reminder that sometimes our own minds can be invaded by forces beyond our control. And though I have grown older, the memory remains, a silent echo of terror that I carry with me every day in every shadow. Redditor 7. I've never told anyone this before, but on more than one warm Southern California night, while sitting on my porch with a cold beer in hand, I've witnessed things that defy any rational explanation. It's become part of my nightly ritual. After a long day, I settle into my worn deck chair, gaze upward at the endless canvas of stars, and let my mind drift. Most nights, the universe seems benign. A scattering of satellites, the occasional plane cutting across the sky, and the familiar flash of a shooting star. But on certain nights, I see something different. It starts subtly. I remember one particular night vividly. The air was thick with the gentle warmth of summer, a soft breeze carrying the distant sound of waves crashing on a nearby beach. I had cracked open a beer and was half listening to the soft rock playing on my old radio when I noticed a peculiar glimmer in the sky. At first, I assumed it was just another satellite, but it didn't move in the straight, predictable line I was used to. Instead, it danced, moving in bizarre, almost erratic patterns that seemed to defy gravity. The object pulsed with an immense, almost blinding light, radiating a hue that was neither entirely white nor the familiar neon glow of a street lamp. For a few moments, it hovered in one spot, then darted off so quickly that by the time I blinked, it was gone. I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was just some kind of atmospheric anomaly, I told myself, though deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Over the years, I've seen similar displays. Objects that weren't satellites, planes, or shooting stars, but something altogether other. Their movements are erratic, unpredictable, and often accompanied by a brilliance that outshines every other light in the night sky. I'm not one to indulge in wild conspiracy theories, and I've always been skeptical of UFO lore. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't earthly. I remember another night vividly. It was a clear, crisp evening in late summer. I was on my porch again, beer in hand, when I noticed two objects in the sky. One flickering with an eerie blue light, the other a deep burning orange. They weren't in any formation I recognized. Instead of moving in a straight line like satellites usually do, They twirled slowly in a synchronized, almost balletic motion. I sat there, entranced by the sight, feeling both a sense of awe and a chill that crept steadily up my spine. Every muscle in my body tensed as I watched them swirl against the backdrop of the inky void. The objects would sometimes seem to pause mid-air, as if contemplating their next move, then accelerate suddenly and vanish within seconds. I'd run my fingers over the condensation on my beer bottle, trying to steady my racing heart. I found it difficult to look away, even though every instinct told me that what I was witnessing was not normal. I recall thinking, what if they're watching me? A thought so absurd, yet so persistent that it left me sleepless for hours afterward. I've discussed these encounters with a few friends, though most laughed them off, labeling me as the weird stargazer, or insisting it was just an overactive imagination fueled by too many late nights and cold beers. I understand the skepticism. After all, how can one be sure that what I've seen isn't merely a trick of the light or a fleeting illusion born of fatigue? Yet I can't deny the clarity of those moments. I remember every detail, the slow, almost deliberate movement of the objects, the way their light pulsated in a pattern that seemed too coordinated to be random, and the overwhelming sense that, for a brief, shimmering moment, I was witnessing something profoundly otherworldly. One night, I even tried to capture evidence with my phone, but the images came out blurry and indistinct. Nothing that could convince a doubter of the reality I'd experienced. In the soft glow of my phone screen, all that appeared were smudges of light that no filter or resolution could fully capture. It's as if the universe itself had conspired to keep those moments hidden, accessible only to the eyes of those who are willing to truly look up and wonder. Living in Southern California has its advantages when it comes to stargazing. The skies here are often remarkably clear, and the absence of heavy light pollution in my area lets even the faintest celestial objects shine through. But it also means that, on nights like these, the heavens can reveal secrets that many urban dwellers would never see. I sometimes think about the vastness of the cosmos, billions of stars, countless galaxies, and the possibility that among them there might be beings or phenomena that we can barely imagine. And when those strange objects dance across the sky, I feel a connection to that immense mystery, a sense that, in some way, I'm part of a cosmic narrative too grand to fully comprehend. Yet there's an underlying unease that I carry with me. Each time I see one of those bizarre lights, I can't help but feel that it's a message, a silent, cosmic punctuation mark placed in the night to remind me that our understanding of reality is as limited as the view from my porch. It's a feeling of vulnerability, as if I'm an unwitting observer to something that defies our laws of physics and logic. That feeling stays with me long after the light has vanished, lingering in the quiet moments before sleep, when the only sound is the gentle hum of the world outside and the echo of my own thoughts. I've spent many nights trying to reconcile these experiences with my rational mind. I read scientific articles about atmospheric phenomena, theories about plasma balls and other natural occurrences that can create ephemeral lights in the sky. But none of these explanations capture the sense of deliberate motion and intelligence that I witnessed. It's not just the beauty of those lights that stays with me, it's the eerie, almost sentient way they moved, as if they were aware of my presence and were putting on a private show just for me. Sometimes I think about what those objects might be. Are they experimental aircraft, advanced technology from some unknown source, or perhaps something even more unfathomable, a glimpse into a realm of existence that operates on principles we can't yet grasp? I remain skeptical of the more fantastical explanations, but deep down, I'm drawn to the possibility that these events are part of a larger cosmic puzzle that I'm only beginning to piece together. I've never felt compelled to share this story widely. The skepticism and ridicule often discourage me, but for me, it's not about convincing others. It's about acknowledging a truth that I experienced, however inexplicable it may seem. I live with the memory of those lights, like a quiet, persistent flame that both warms and chills me in equal measure. Each night when I step onto my porch with a beer in hand and the stars overhead, I know that the universe might once again reveal a sliver of its hidden wonders, and I wait, heart pounding and eyes searching, ready for the next dance of light in the darkness. Redditor 8. When I was 8 or 9, back in 1994, I experienced something in the sky that I still think about from time to time. It was a cold winter evening in our small town, and I'd just finished a rough game of five-a-side soccer with my friends. The adrenaline from the match still pulsed in my veins as I walked home with my mom and one of my buddies, the chill in the air reminding me that night had already fallen hard. We were on a gravel road that wound its way past open fields and scraggly, snow-dusted trees. The sky, though dark, held a scattered sprinkling of stars, but nothing compared to what caught my eye that night. As we trudged along, I glanced upward while stepping off the porch of a neighbor's house. In that instant, a myriad of light specks erupted across the sky. They weren't the usual slow-moving satellites or the fleeting trail of a shooting star. These lights were vibrant. Blue, orange, red, green, all pulsing with an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. I remember how they danced and shifted positions. Some broke apart into smaller glimmers, while others sped up and then slowed, then disappeared altogether. New ones appeared as if by magic, joining the cosmic ballet for a few breathless moments before vanishing back into the darkness. Curious and awestruck, my friend and I watched them all the way home. I remember pointing excitedly to my mom, who glanced up and, though she saw them too, merely offered a disinterested shrug as if they were nothing more than a natural oddity. But I knew better. Standing outside the car after we pulled in, I stayed rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the display. I could tell that these weren't reflections off a window or the typical scatter of distant man-made lights. They were moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, almost choreographed, as they slowly drifted in a southeasterly direction. Now, as an adult, I often wonder if what I witnessed was a meteor breaking apart in our atmosphere, with the different elements burning in those brilliant colors. It makes sense, scientifically, yet even the most logical explanation can't quite capture the feeling of standing under that sky, feeling the awe and the quiet thrill of knowing that something extraordinary was unfolding above me. But that wasn't the end of my strange encounters with the sky. Years later, while I was in college, I had another incident that has since become part of my own private legend. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd been up late playing Counter-Strike in a cramped dorm room, headphones blasting and adrenaline high from the game. In the middle of a tense match, the room suddenly fell into an eerie silence as the lights overhead began to dim. At first, I thought it was just a power fluctuation, nothing unusual in a college dorm. But then I heard a deep, resonant rumble, as if the very air had been struck by some colossal force. I pulled off my headphones and stared out the window. Outside, the night sky, usually a uniform canopy of darkness punctuated by distant streetlights, was now illuminated by an otherworldly blue-green glow. The light wasn't static, it pulsed and rippled across the clouds, as if breathing. I was frozen, a mix of curiosity and terror anchoring me to the spot. The rumble subsided, and in its wake, the lights returned to their normal brightness, as if nothing had happened. I didn't understand it then, and even now, I can only piece together what little I know. The next day, it turned out that some guy had gotten drunk and broken into our neighborhood electrical transformer station. The incident had caused a temporary blackout and a cascade of electrical malfunctions that painted the sky with that eerie glow for a few minutes. Back in 1994, however, there was no such explanation. I was a kid playing football and walking home with my mom when the sky revealed a display that seemed to stretch the limits of my young imagination. I remember that night like a vivid dream, the chill in the air, the crunch of gravel underfoot, and the dazzling moving lights overhead that seemed to speak of mysteries beyond our understanding. I've thought about it countless times since, wondering if there was some cosmic message hidden in the pattern of those lights, or if it was simply nature showing off its most spectacular colors in a fleeting moment of beauty. I don't consider myself a UFO believer in the grand conspiratorial sense. I know that most sightings can be explained by meteorological phenomena or misidentified human technology, but what I saw that night wasn't ordinary. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated wonder, a brief glimpse into a world that exists on the fringes of our comprehension. It felt like a secret shared between the universe and me, a moment of silent communion under a sky that, for one precious instant, felt alive with possibilities. Even now, when I'm out on my porch in Southern California or walking under a clear night sky in a small town, I sometimes catch a glimpse of a light that makes my heart skip a beat. A tiny, fleeting reminder of that long-ago night when the sky danced with colors and my mind was set alight with the mystery of it all. I've never spoken about these moments much, for fear that people will think I'm spinning wild tales. But in the quiet of the night, when the only sound is the whisper of the wind and the distant hum of the world, I can still feel that spark of wonder, and I'm reminded that sometimes the universe chooses to show us just a hint of its infinite secrets, leaving us forever changed.